The thing about betrayal is that it always smells like cheap hotel soap and lies. I'm Eddie Hawkins, and 3 weeks ago I walked into the Marriott downtown expecting to surprise my wife Claire with dinner after her corporate summit. Instead, I got the surprise of a lifetime. There she was, sitting on the edge of the bed with her boss, Bradley Foster, her blouse unbuttoned, both of them laughing like teenagers. The look on their faces when I walked in was worth every sleepless night since. "Eddie!" Claire jumped up, frantically buttoning her shirt. "What are you doing here?" I stood there in my work clothes, dirt under my fingernails, steel-toed boots, everything that reminded her she'd married beneath her station. Bradley sat there in his $1,000 suit, smirking like he owned the world. Which, in this town, he pretty much did. "Apologize to my boss," Claire said, her voice taking on that ice-cold tone I'd been hearing more often lately. "It's not his fault they put us in the same room." I looked at Bradley, then at the single king-size bed, then at the bottle of champagne on the nightstand. "Sure," I said, my voice steady. "Let me apologize for not being as gullible as you thought." That's when I spotted Bradley's laptop sitting open on the desk, probably full of whatever corporate secrets he used to impress married women. Before either of them could react, I grabbed it and hurled it against the wall. The screen shattered with a satisfying crack. Bradley's face went white. "You maniac. That had everything on it." "Then you better hope your IT department is good at recovery," I said, heading for the door. "And Bradley, stay away from my wife." The drive home took forever. My hand shook on the steering wheel, not from fear but from rage. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage we split down the middle because Claire insisted on being independent. And this is what I got for trusting her. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You learn to pay attention, you notice things, like the fact that Bradley's laptop had a cloud backup sticker right on the corner, complete with his login email visible on a sticky note. That night, while Claire slept in the guest room claiming she needed space to think, I sat in my workshop and got to work. 20 years in construction management teaches you to be resourceful. 10 minutes of password recovery attempts, and I was in. What I found made my evening considerably brighter. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Bradley Foster wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was having affairs with half the women in his company. Worse, he was using his position to pressure them, documenting everything in emails like some kind of twisted trophy collection. There were messages about illegal firings, harassment cover-ups, and financial irregularities that would make the SEC very interested. I downloaded everything onto 3 separate drives and printed the most damaging emails. Then I sat back and smiled for the first time in weeks. Claire thought she was playing in the big leagues now. Time to show her what happened when amateurs tried to con a professional. The next morning, Claire left for work without saying a word. She'd put on her best power suit, the red one that cost more than I made in a week, and walked out like nothing had happened. I waited exactly 1 hour before I struck. Every employee at Foster Industries got the same email that morning, sent from Bradley's own account, a company-wide message containing his most damaging correspondence. The subject line read, "Transparency Initiative," and the body was simple. As promised, here's how we really operate. Attached were screenshots of Bradley calling the female employees assets to be managed, emails about firing people for refusing his advances, and financial documents showing how he'd been skimming from client accounts. I sent it at 9:30 a.m., right when everyone would be settling in with their coffee. My friend Frank called me at 10:15, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Frank used to be a cop before he went private investigator, and he had contacts everywhere. "Eddie, you beautiful maniac," he wheezed. "The Foster building is in complete chaos. Security's been called, HR is having emergency meetings, and Bradley's locked himself in his office." "What about Claire?" I asked. "Oh, she's busy. Apparently she's been fielding calls all morning, trying to do damage control. Word is, she's claiming someone hacked the system." That afternoon, Claire came home early. She slammed the door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. "What did you do?" she demanded, storming into my workshop where I was calmly organizing my tools. "I fixed a leaky pipe in the basement," I said without looking up. "The washing machine's running better now." "Don't play dumb with me, Eddie." The email. Bradley's account was compromised. I finally looked at her. Even furious, she was beautiful. That's what had gotten me into this mess 15 years ago, thinking that someone who looked like her could actually love someone who looked like me. "Compromised," I repeated. "That's a fancy word. Did you learn that in your corporate training?" "This isn't funny. Bradley could lose his job. The whole company could collapse." "And that would be a tragedy," I said, turning back to my tools. "All those hard-working people, out of work because their boss couldn't keep his pants on. She grabbed my arm, spinning me around. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Bradley has lawyers, connections. He can destroy you. I looked down at her manicured hand on my work shirt. Claire, I've been getting destroyed by people like Bradley my whole life. The difference is, I know how to rebuild. That evening, she tried a different approach. She made dinner, actually cooked, something she hadn't done in months, and opened a bottle of wine. Eddie, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, I know things have been difficult between us lately. Difficult, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? I made a mistake. I admit that. But what you did today, it's not just hurting Bradley, it's hurting me too. I work there. I took a bite of the pasta. It was good. She'd always been a decent cook when she wanted to be. How exactly is it hurting you? People are asking questions about my relationship with Bradley, about whether I knew about the other things. Did you? She hesitated just long enough to give me my answer. Of course not. Claire, I said, setting down my fork, I've known you for 17 years. You hesitate before you lie. You always have. Her face flushed. I'm not lying. Then you won't mind if I share some of the other emails I found, the ones where you and Bradley discuss which employees are problems and which ones might be flexible about company policies. The color drained from her face. You're bluffing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the screenshots I'd saved. Her own words, in black and white, discussing how to handle Eddie's jealousy and whether they should accelerate the timeline. Timeline for what? I asked, showing her the screen. She stared at the phone for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not guilt or shame, but calculation. Fine, she said. You want to play games? Let's play games. She stood up, leaving her dinner untouched, and walked upstairs. An hour later, I heard her on the phone in the bedroom, talking in hushed tones to someone, probably Melanie, her best friend and biggest enabler. I finished my dinner alone, then went to my workshop and started planning my next move. The thing about revenge is that it's like construction. You need a solid foundation before you start building up. 3 days later, Claire struck back. I was at the job site, reviewing blueprints with my crew when my phone started buzzing. Text after text, all from people I knew, friends, neighbors, even my brother in Detroit. The messages were all variations of the same thing. Dude, what the heck is this video? I stepped away from the crew and opened the link. It was security footage from our house. Our bedroom, specifically. The timestamp showed it was from 2 weeks ago, during one of our arguments about money. Claire had edited it to remove the audio and context, so all you could see was me gesturing angrily while she cowered on the bed. The caption read, When you marry someone you barely know. Ladies, trust your instincts. It had been posted to her social media accounts and shared in every local group she belonged to. The comments were already pouring in. Words like abusive and dangerous and typical blue-collar rage. I called Frank immediately. I saw it, he said before I could speak. It's clever, completely out of context, but effective. Can we prove it's edited? Maybe, but the damage is already done. Half the town thinks you're some kind of monster now. I looked around the job site. My crew was pretending to work, but I could see them glancing at their phones, whispering to each other. Word traveled fast in our business. Frank, I said, remember when you offered to dig up dirt on Claire's spending habits? Yeah, do it, and I need you to find out everything you can about Bradley Foster, not just the company stuff, personal stuff, family, finances, where he goes, who he talks to. Eddie, what are you planning? I'm planning to remind everyone that there are two sides to every story. That evening, I drove to Mulligan's, the dive bar where Frank and I usually met. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which made it perfect for what I needed. Tina, the bartender, poured me a beer without being asked. She was in her 40s, sharp as a razor, and had been serving drinks to this crowd for 20 years. If you wanted information in this town, Tina was your best source. Rough day? She asked, sliding the beer across the bar. Getting rougher, I admitted. I suppose you've seen the video. Honey, everyone's seen the video. Question is, what are you going to do about it? That depends. What are people saying? She leaned against the bar, lowering her voice. Mixed reactions. The people who know you aren't buying it, but the people who only know you by reputation, she shrugged. Construction worker, blue-collar guy, married up. It fits their narrative. What narrative? That guys like you always resent women like her? That it was only a matter of time before you snapped? I took a long drink of beer. And what do you think? I think Claire Hawkins is a piece of work who finally bit off more than she could chew, and I think you're about to remind her that underestimating people is a dangerous habit. Frank arrived an hour later with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Your wife, he said, sliding into the booth across from me, has been very busy. He opened the folder and spread out bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts. Secret credit cards, cash advances, purchases she's been hiding from you. That red suit she wore yesterday? $1,500. The jewelry she claimed was costume? Real diamonds, paid for with a card you don't know about. Where's she getting the money? That's the interesting part. Bradley's been giving her cash bonuses that don't appear on any official payroll, always just under the reporting threshold. Very careful, very deliberate. I studied the documents. How long has this been going on? 8 months, based on what I could find. But Eddie, there's more. He pulled out another set of papers. Bradley Foster is married to Diane Foster, daughter of the guy who owns half the commercial real estate in this city. She's got money, connections, and according to my sources, she's been getting suspicious about Bradley's late nights and business trips. Does she know about Claire? Not yet, but she's hired her own investigator. Apparently, this isn't Bradley's first affair. I leaned back in the booth, processing this information. So Bradley's cheating on his rich wife with my wife, using company money to buy her loyalty. That's about the size of it, and Claire's been helping him cover his tracks with other employees. She's not just a victim in this, Eddie. She's an accomplice. Tina appeared with another round of beers. You boys look like you're planning something interesting. Just discussing current events, I said. She smiled. Well, if those current events happen to involve a certain CEO getting his comeuppance, you might find some people in this town very supportive. After Frank left, I sat in the bar for another hour, thinking. The video Claire had posted was already spreading beyond our immediate circle. By tomorrow, everyone in town would have seen it. My reputation, built over 20 years of honest work, was being destroyed by 30 seconds of manipulated footage. But Claire had made a mistake. She'd declared war on someone who had nothing left to lose. I paid my tab and walked out to the parking lot. Bradley's BMW was parked across the street, outside an upscale restaurant. Through the window, I could see him having dinner with a blonde woman who wasn't Claire. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, then sent them to Frank with a simple message. Found another player in the game. The pieces were falling into place. Bradley thought he was the puppet master, pulling strings and manipulating people. Claire thought she was climbing the social ladder, trading up from her blue-collar husband to a corporate executive. Neither of them realized they were about to learn what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I'd spent most of the night in my workshop, not building anything, but thinking. Claire had left early again, probably meeting Bradley to strategize their next move. The house felt empty without her, but not in a sad way. More like when you finally get rid of furniture that never fit the room properly. My first stop was Bradley's neighborhood. Foster Hills, they called it. Not because of Bradley, but because it sat on a hill overlooking the rest of us regular folks. The houses were the kind you saw in magazines, all perfect lawns and circular driveways. Bradley's house was the biggest on the block, a modern monstrosity of glass and steel that probably cost more than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. His BMW was in the driveway, along with a silver Mercedes that I assumed belonged to his wife. I parked across the street and waited. At 11:30, Bradley came out in tennis clothes, carrying a racket bag. He looked around nervously before getting in the BMW, like he expected someone to be watching him. He wasn't wrong. I followed him to the country club, staying far enough back to avoid detection. He met the same blonde woman from the restaurant, and they disappeared into the club together. I took more pictures, then headed to my real destination. Diane Foster answered the door herself, which surprised me. I'd expected a housekeeper or some other staff member. She was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with a kind of polished look that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at my work clothes with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Foster, my name is Eddie Hawkins. I think we need to talk about your husband." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about." "Your husband is having an affair with my wife," I said simply. "I have proof." She stared at me for a long moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "You better come in." The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside. Everything was white and chrome and probably worth more than my annual salary. Diane led me to a living room that could have housed my entire workshop. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "That would be nice." She disappeared into the kitchen, giving me time to look around. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, showing Bradley and Diane at various social events, charity galas, vacation spots. They looked happy in the pictures, but then again, people like them were good at looking happy. Diane returned with coffee in cups that were too delicate for my hands. She sat across from me in a chair that probably cost more than my truck. "So," she said, "tell me about this affair." I pulled out my phone and showed her the pictures from the hotel room. Her face remained impassive, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the coffee cup. "This was 3 weeks ago," I said, "but based on what I've learned, it's been going on for at least 8 months. What else do you know?" I told her about the secret payments to Claire, the company emails, the systematic harassment of other employees. I showed her the financial records Frank had uncovered, the pattern of behavior that suggested this wasn't Bradley's first affair. When I finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, staring at her coffee. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because your husband destroyed my marriage, and now he and my wife are trying to destroy my reputation. I figure you have a right to know what kind of man you're married to." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Hawkins, I've known what kind of man Bradley is for years. The question is what I'm going to do about it." "What do you mean?" She stood up and walked to a window that looked out over the city. "My father built this town, Mr. Hawkins. Foster Industries exists because of his money and connections. Bradley thinks he's some kind of business genius, but he's just a pretty face I married when I was too young to know better." "Then why stay with him?" "Because divorce is expensive, and Bradley has been very careful about hiding assets. I've been waiting for the right moment to act." She turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she smiled. "I think you just gave it to me." We talked for another hour. Diane was nothing like I'd expected. She was smart, ruthless, and had been planning her own revenge for months. She'd hired investigators, accountants, even a forensic computer specialist to track Bradley's activities. "The problem," she explained, "is that I needed proof of criminal activity, not just infidelity. What you've given me about the company harassment and financial irregularities, that's exactly what I needed. What happens now? Now we coordinate our efforts. You want to destroy Bradley and your wife socially. I want to destroy them legally and financially. I think we can help each other." As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not for reconciliation with Claire, that ship had sailed, but for justice. For the satisfaction of watching people who thought they were untouchable learn that everyone has vulnerabilities. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the car following me. A black sedan, staying just far enough back to avoid notice. I took a few random turns to confirm it, then pulled into a gas station and waited. The sedan drove past without stopping, but I got a good look at the driver. Jason, Bradley's assistant. The weaselly little man who did Bradley's dirty work and probably knew where all the bodies were buried. They were watching me now, which meant I was making them nervous. Good. I filled up my tank and headed home, already planning my next move. Claire's car was in the driveway, which meant she was home early again. Probably another strategy session with Bradley about how to handle the Eddie problem. I walked into the house to find her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and papers spread everywhere. She looked up when I entered, her face hard. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" "This has gone far enough, Eddie. The emails, the harassment, the stalking. It needs to stop." "Stalking." I sat down across from her. "Is that what we're calling it now? You followed Bradley to his house yesterday. You talked to his wife. That's stalking." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "How do you know I talked to Diane?" She hesitated. That tell again, then recovered. "Bradley saw you there." "Interesting, because Bradley was at the country club with his girlfriend when I visited Diane. So either he's lying to you about where he was, or you're lying to me about how you know." Her face flushed. "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you're out of control." "Claire," I said quietly, "you posted a video that makes me look like an abusive husband. You've been stealing money from our joint accounts to pay for gifts from your boyfriend. You've been helping him harass women at work and cover up financial crimes. And you think I'm out of control. I never stole anything, and I certainly never helped Bradley harass anyone." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to one of the emails Frank had uncovered. March 15th. You to Bradley. "Jennifer in accounting is asking too many questions about the Peterson contract. Maybe it's time to reassign her to something less sensitive." April 3rd. The new girl in HR seems naive. Perfect for the summer party planning committee. Should I go on? She stared at the phone, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to retract that video and post an apology. You're going to transfer every penny you've taken from our accounts back where it belongs. And you're going to find somewhere else to live while we figure out how to divide our assets. And if I don't? I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Then Diane Foster's divorce attorney gets copies of everything I've found, along with the local newspaper, the state labor board, and anyone else who might be interested in how Foster Industries really operates. She slammed the laptop shut and stood up. You're making a huge mistake, Eddie. Bradley has resources you can't imagine. He can make your life very difficult. More difficult than being married to someone who thinks I'm too stupid to notice when she's lying to me? She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's not. After she left, I sat in the quiet house and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The pieces were moving exactly where I wanted them. Bradley and Claire thought they were playing chess, but they'd brought checkers to a chess match. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Package delivered to your workshop. You're going to love this. I walked out to my workshop to find a box sitting on my workbench. Inside were surveillance photos, financial records, and a USB drive labeled Insurance. Frank's note was simple. Everything you need for the final act. Use it wisely. I plugged in the USB drive and smiled as the files loaded. Bradley Foster was about to learn that there was a big difference between being powerful and being untouchable, and Claire was about to discover that underestimating your husband was the most expensive mistake she'd ever made. The next morning brought the kind of autumn rain that makes everything look gray and miserable. Perfect weather for what I had planned. I'd spent the night going through Frank's files, and what I found was better than I'd hoped. Bradley wasn't just a cheating husband and predatory boss. He was also an idiot who documented everything. Emails, text messages, financial transfers, even voice memos where he bragged about his conquests. The USB drive contained enough evidence to end his career, his marriage, and probably send him to prison for embezzlement and harassment. But I wanted more than justice through the legal system. I wanted public humiliation. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt when I walked into that hotel room. My phone rang at 8 a.m., Claire's number. Eddie, we need to meet, she said without preamble. Somewhere neutral. We can work this out. Can we? Bradley's willing to make this worth your while. A generous settlement, a good reference for your business, maybe even some contracts with Foster Industries. I almost laughed. You think this is about money? Isn't everything? Claire, if this was about money, I would have divorced you years ago and taken half of everything. This is about respect. Then meet with us. Let us show you some respect. I thought about it. Having them both in one place would be convenient for what I had planned. Fine. Where? The Riverside Motel, room 237, 1 hour. The Riverside Motel was exactly the kind of place you'd expect for a clandestine meeting, cheap, anonymous, and probably paid for with cash. I arrived early and parked where I could see the entire lot. Frank's van was already there, parked behind the building where it wouldn't be visible from the room. He'd insisted on backup, and I wasn't stupid enough to refuse. Bradley might be a coward, but cornered cowards could be dangerous. At exactly 9 a.m., Bradley's BMW pulled into the lot. He and Claire got out together, looking around nervously before heading to room 237. I gave them 5 minutes to get settled, then walked over and knocked on the door. Claire opened it, wearing the kind of fake smile she used on difficult clients. Eddie, thank you for coming. The room was standard motel fare, 2 beds, a small table, and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant. Bradley sat at the table in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the shabby surroundings. Eddie, he said, standing up and extending his hand, I'm glad we could work this out like civilized adults. I ignored the hand and sat down across from him. Let's hear your offer. For the next 10 minutes, Bradley laid out a proposal that was actually quite generous. A cash settlement, guaranteed contracts for my construction business, and a glowing recommendation that would open doors throughout the region. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement and promise to stop harassing them. It's a good deal, Eddie, Claire said when Bradley finished. More than fair. And all I have to do is pretend I never caught you two together. Pretend I don't know about the other women Bradley's been assaulting. Pretend I don't know about the money he's been stealing from his own company. Bradley's face went pale. I don't know what you think you know. I know about Jennifer in accounting, who quit after you cornered her in the supply closet. I know about the Peterson contract where you inflated the costs by 30% and pocketed the difference. I know about the 3 other married women you've been sleeping with, including the mayor's wife. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. I know about all of it, Bradley. The question is, what are you willing to do to keep it quiet? Claire reached for the phone, but I was faster. That's not how this works. What do you want? Bradley asked, sweat beading on his forehead. I want you to understand something, I said, standing up. You picked the wrong marriage to destroy. I walked to the window and opened the curtains. In the parking lot, Frank was setting up what looked like a small satellite dish, but was actually a wireless transmitter. At the same time, cars were pulling into the lot. Tina's beat-up Honda, several vehicles I recognized from the bar, and one that made me smile. Diane Foster's silver Mercedes. "What's happening?" Claire asked, looking out the window. "Justice," I said simply. I turned back to Bradley, who was now standing and backing toward the door. "See, the thing about being underestimated your whole life is that people don't expect you to be smart. They don't expect you to plan ahead. They certainly don't expect you to have friends in useful places." "Friends?" "Tina, for instance. Did you know she used to work in IT before she started bartending? Very handy with computers and surveillance equipment. And Frank, my private investigator friend, he's got connections with every reporter and blogger in the state." Bradley's hand was on the door handle now. "You're bluffing." I smiled and pulled out a second phone, a burner I'd bought specifically for this moment. "Frank, we're ready." Through the window, I could see Frank giving me a thumbs up. The wireless transmitter was active, which meant everything being said in this room was now being broadcast live to a very select audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, speaking to the room but knowing my words were being heard elsewhere, "I'd like you to meet Bradley Foster, CEO of Foster Industries, and my wife Claire. They've been having an affair for 8 months, using company resources to fund their relationship and systematically destroying the lives of anyone who got in their way." Claire lunged for the door, but I blocked her path. "We're not done yet." I pulled out the printed emails and financial records Frank had compiled. "Bradley, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been embezzling money from client contracts? Or should I start with the harassment complaints that mysteriously disappeared from HR files?" "This is entrapment," Bradley said, his voice shaking. "It's illegal." "Actually, it's not. We're on private property, you came here voluntarily, and I'm not a law enforcement officer. This is just a conversation between friends." Through the window, I could see more cars arriving. Word was spreading, just as I'd planned. In a town this size, a scandal like this would be front-page news within hours. "Claire," I said, turning to my wife, "would you like to tell everyone about the video you posted? The one where you edited security footage to make me look abusive?" She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Eddie, please. We can still work this out." "No," I said quietly. "We can." I walked to the door and opened it. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Bar regulars, neighbors, people from both our workplaces. And standing at the front, looking like she was enjoying every minute of this, was Diane Foster. "Mrs. Foster," I called out, "would you like to come in and meet your husband's girlfriend?" The next few minutes were chaos. Diane stormed into the room, followed by several other people. Bradley tried to run, but Frank was blocking the back exit. Claire collapsed onto one of the beds, sobbing. In the middle of it all, I stood quietly and watched my revenge unfold exactly as I'd planned it. Bradley's reputation was destroyed. By evening, everyone in town would know what kind of man he really was. The evidence Frank had gathered would ensure that criminal charges followed, and Diane's divorce attorneys would make sure he lost everything in the settlement. Claire's social climbing days were over. The video she'd posted had backfired spectacularly when the full context came out. Her friends were already distancing themselves, and her job at Foster Industries wouldn't survive the scandal. As for me, I was finally free. I walked out of the motel room and got in my truck. Behind me, the chaos continued, but it was no longer my problem. I had a business to run, a life to rebuild, and a future that didn't include people who thought they were better than me. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in months, the sun was shining. Checkout time indeed. I was in my workshop, building a cabinet for a client, when Frank stopped by with the final update. "Bradley pled guilty to embezzlement and harassment," he said, settling into his usual chair. 3 years minimum, probably 5. Diane got everything in the divorce, the house, the business, even his car. "And Claire?" "Moved back in with her mother in Ohio. Word is she's working at a call center now." I nodded and continued sanding the cabinet door. The work felt good, honest in a way that my marriage never had. "Any regrets?" Frank asked. I thought about it for a moment. "About the marriage ending? No. About the way it ended?" I shrugged. They made their choices. I just made sure there were consequences. Frank left after an hour, and I went back to work. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the neighborhood, the sound of normal life continuing. My life was quieter now, simpler, but it was mine. The cabinet was almost finished. Tomorrow I'd deliver it to Mrs. Patterson, who'd hired me after hearing about my situation through the local gossip network. Apparently, standing up to people like Bradley Foster was good for business. I turned off the lights and headed into the house. It was smaller now, just me, but it felt more like home than it had in years. In the kitchen, I opened a beer and sat at the table where Claire and I used to eat dinner together. The silence didn't bother me anymore. It was peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news about Foster Industries. Well done. D. Diane Foster, probably. We'd spoken a few times during Bradley's trial, comparing notes and coordinating our testimony. She was tougher than I'd initially thought, and smarter than her ex-husband had ever realized. I deleted the message and finished my beer. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to build something worthwhile with my own two hands. The underdog had won, but more importantly, the game was finally over, and I was ready for whatever came next.